Good evening. My name is Mac Barrett. I have the privilege of serving here at Roosevelt House as the curator of public programming. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Roosevelt House Director Harold Holzer to what promises to be an enthralling and important discussion about how to engage Gen Z voters in this upcoming election and beyond. To the Gen Zers in the room, if there are any, a special welcome, and welcome also to our esteemed guest, Councilmember Chi Osei and Bradley Tusk. I'll leave fuller introductions to of the two of them to our wonderful moderator, Kelly Mina. Kelly is a reporter for New York One. Previously, she was a reporter and senior editor at Kings County Politics, where she worked on several investigative pieces exposing discriminatory housing practices. In addition, she has been a reporter at the Brooklyn Daily Eagle and CNN Politics. The way the evening will go is, following the discussion, we will open it up to questions from you all, and after that, we will adjourn to the Four Freedoms room upstairs, where copies of Bradley's book will be available for sale and signing, along, of course, with some delicious pizza. And as you may know, this is the former home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, and so before passing it off to Kelly, I'd like to offer some of Eleanor's immortal words. The minimum, Eleanor said, the very basic minimum of a citizen's duty is to cast a vote on election day. Even now, too few of us discharge this minimal duty. By such negligence, such indifference, such sheer laziness, we discard unused a gift and a privilege obtained for us at a gigantic cost and sacrifice. With that, take it away, Kelly.
Hello. Thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm Kelly Mena. I'm a political reporter for New York One. I cover City Hall and local government. Thank you for being here this evening. Sitting alongside of me are two men who have two things in common. They love politics and they want to engage young voters. I'm going to introduce to my left City Council member Chi Osei. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you love voting in politics.
Yeah, well, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here, sitting alongside two icons I would consider. But yeah, I'm New York City Council member Chi Osei. I represent the 36th Council District, which is in Brooklyn. It consists of Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights. I got elected in 2021 as the youngest member of the City Council and first Gen Z elected official in New York State at the age of 19. Just kidding, I was 23 at the time.
I was gonna say 19.
I know, it's a little too early. Yeah, and over the past couple of years, not only have I been, navigating how to govern in my district and in the city as a Gen Z elected official, I've also been, figuring out how to engage young people in our democracy, most especially within our local democracy right here in New York City. And it's been really cool to use the tools of social media to bring people out to city council hearings, to the polls, to various different things that happen in the city. And I think that's what has always made me acknowledge the beauty of our democracy, is that it truly can be accessible to everyone. It's a bit of a puzzle to figure out how to get there, but I like puzzles.
So do I. I would say I like challenges in particular. Bradley Tusk, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about this.
Been working in and around politics for a long time. Worked here in New York City government. I was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager when he ran for mayor. And I've had a career both in tech and in politics. I also own a bookstore on the Lower East Side, so I'm really good at losing money. It's called P&T Knitwear if anybody needs a book. Having seen this from a lot of different angles, what I've taken away from my kind of 30 years in and around politics is politicians are human beings, and they make decisions based on, what they think is right, but even more likely, how they stay in office because they want to keep their job just like the rest of us. And we keep expecting them to be superhuman and to do what's not in their interest, and it doesn't happen, right? The reason why we keep having school shootings is because we don't ban assault weapons. The reason why we don't ban assault weapons is because right now, if you are a Republican congressman, you know that if you were to speak out for that, you would lose your seat. And to be clear, I think both parties are equally guilty of this on both sides in different ways. But fundamentally, the thing that I've learned is, we all have this tool in our pockets that I believe could be used very securely to allow people to vote. And we live in a world right now where too few people vote. The extremes ultimately control both who wins office and then what they do once they're in office. And that has led to either A, the total dysfunction and polarization of a place like Washington, D.C., or B, totally one-sided governments, and that could be the state of Texas on the right, it could be the city of San Francisco on the left. In my view, none of that is good. We've got to get back to a world where people can work together again. They can be bipartisan. They can compromise. There can be consensus. And the only way it's ever going to happen is if it's safe to do that. And that's only ever going to happen if primary turnout increases exponentially. And so I've gotten really passionate about mobile voting, and we created the Mobile Voting Project in 2017. We funded elections in 7 different states where either deployed military or people with disabilities voted in real elections on their phones. Those worked. I got a lot of grief from the cybersecurity community that it wasn't safe enough, so we started building our own mobile voting technology. We're 4 years into that process right now. Next year, when we're done, we're going to make it free and open source, so any government can have it and use it free of charge. And then the next step, and the reason why I wrote this book, is the really hard part, which is changing the system. Ironically, we're going to unite both parties against us to a certain extent, because if you know how to hold power in the current system, you're not going to necessarily want to risk losing power. And yet, I believe that we fundamentally should have the right to use our phones to vote, because otherwise voting is way too hard. And so we're going to have to start running legislation in cities all over the country and then states all over the country. And, we have people like Chi who are really young and really visionary, but we need a lot more people like that. And so, the book itself is sort of a call to kind of start building this movement. And I've been going around the country talking about this issue because I think, to me, this is the one scalable solution to fix our democracy.
Amazing. So 2 different perspectives. I'm going to start with you, City Councilman. You talked about using your social media. I watched some of your social media videos. You had a recent one about creating more affordable housing. Talk to me about why you want to harness social media for bringing more people into the democracy, but how does that engage younger voters?
Yeah, well, I see half of my job, or half of any elected official's job, whether in the roles of governance or in elections, is getting the word out about the issues, reaching people where they're at. Whether it's through mail, whether it's through door-to-door contact, whether it's through social media. And that's something that I've been, investing in over the past couple of years that I've been in office, and even through my campaign. Listen, I think a lot of young people exist on TikTok and Instagram and various other forms of social media, but I don't believe that many of our elected officials know how to use those platforms to break down important information like elections, like policy, and in a way that is both entertaining but also educational.
I can say that they really don't. But continue.
And over the past couple of years that I've been in office, I've noticed a void in that, not only within the city council, but across all levels of government across the country. As someone that uses these platforms, as someone who is in these group chats with my friends who do not work in politics, but will bring up things like the election, I've been able to practice in real time how to digest that information to my own peers. And I thought, why don't I copy and paste this in what I do in my professional life? And over the past couple of years, again, we've used the platforms of TikTok and Instagram, even Twitter, to create these videos that engage people who indulge in short form media throughout their day, to educate them on a plethora of different issues, whether it is our democracy and our elections, down to bills that I am pushing in the city council. For example, a couple years ago, the Rent Guidelines Board, which is a mayoral appointed board that votes on how much rent stabilized apartments rents go up each year, proposed a rent increase of about 8 to 16% for 1 to 2 year leases. And usually at these hearings, around 15 to 20 people show up to testify either for those rent increases or against these rent increases. That's an abysmal number for an issue as important as rent here in this city. And we took to TikTok. My office took to TikTok to speak about this issue. This video went viral, and at the next hearing for the Rent Guidelines Board, instead of that 15 to 20 turnout rate, over 1,000 people showed up to this hearing to testify for hours against these proposed rent increases. And at the end of the the decision that was made by the RGB, instead of it being that 8 to 16% increase, even though it was a rent increase, it was only 1.5 to 2.5% for 1 to 2 year leases. And I do credit that to the fact that so many people turned out and engaged in our democracy. And the reason they engaged in that democracy is because someone reached them where they were at, whether it was through social media, TikTok, Instagram, broke down the information about the Rent Guidelines Board and the power that they had in a way that made them care. And that's something that I've been doing after that, and it's been pretty successful, right? We speak about issues that voters who are not usually engaged care about in a way that is accessible and relatable to them. And that's how I've been able to not only engage young people in policy, but also in our democracy as a whole.
Go ahead.
He's being modest. I just want to toot his horn a little bit.
These videos are very complex, intense.
It's also the power of it, right? So one of the things that she has done that I'm such a huge fan of is he is sponsoring legislation that would end the practice of making people pay a broker's fee to rent an apartment in New York City. So right now, for the privilege of someone literally opening a door for you and handing you an application, you're paying them 15% of the annual rent. So that could be thousands and thousands of dollars. And the reality is, most people, especially young people, can't afford that. And the reason why this practice has stayed legal in New York, and New York is the only place in America where it's legal, is because the real estate community is so politically powerful and so wealthy and so strong that they're able to prevent any efforts at reform until this guy came along. And thanks to his TikTok videos and thanks to his use of Instagram and social media and everything else, he has changed the underlying political dynamics of this issue. And now we've got legislation in the city council with, I think, 33 co-sponsors on it. You need 26 to pass a bill in the city council. Bill looks like it's going to come to the floor in October, even if the mayor does veto it. And he might. He really tends to do what the real estate community tells him to do. I think we've got the votes to override it. But ultimately, he just beat, through the power of social media, one of the most powerful special interests in the history of this city. So if you have any doubts about how useful it can be to reach people and organize them, and why at the same time, if you could then allow those people to actually vote that way, how we can really change everything.
That's exactly where I was going to next.
I stole your line. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But I want you guys to engage. It's so important because that's how real ideas come together, how you reach more people. But to you, my question is, does something like what he did with that bill about the broker's fees, does that bolster your hope in your mobile voting app?
Yeah,
You're
totally.
ambitious. Tell us about this ambitious
Right.
plan.
So like the underlying thesis of mobile voting is based on sort of two bets, right? Bet number one is that if you make voting a lot easier, a lot more people will do it. And bet number two is that if a lot more people are engaged in the political process, politicians will have to listen to them as opposed to just taking orders from groups like the Real Estate Board of New York. The first one, to me, was something that I learned. I ran a lot of the campaigns around the U.S. to legalize Uber. And at the time, we were this tiny little tech startup, and the taxi industry was a really powerful industry. But through the app, we were able to get millions of our customers over a couple of years around the country to tell their local elected officials, hey, I like this thing, leave it alone. And we won in every single market in the country. And yet my guess at that time was these same people who were advocating for us, they generally didn't know who their city council member was. They didn't vote in state senate primaries. But when we made it easy enough, they chose to advocate and they had their voice heard, and it made a really big difference. So the first thing we're betting is if people can vote that way, they'll do so, and they'll especially do so if people like Chi are using platforms like TikTok to really engage them. And the second one is, will politicians change their behavior if more people are paying attention? And again, he is the case study for yes, which is when things are quiet, all things being equal, even his colleagues on the city council, they're going to do what the real estate, powerful interests tell them to do because they think that's what you're supposed to do in politics. And I don't want them to spend money against me in my next election. And all of a sudden, he took what was sort of a private behind-the-scenes issue, made it a big public issue, and the entire tenor of the thing changed. And so fundamentally, I think in a lot of ways, you've proven the underlying thesis for mobile voting, which is that when you can truly get people engaged and use the power of technology, a lot more people will participate, and that dissipates the power of the special interests. And quite frankly, that could be teachers' unions, it could be the NRA, it could be any of them. In my view, I don't think any special interest should be dictating our policies. And so, yeah, I think fundamentally this is sort of showing that this kind of thing can work.
And you mentioned it only takes one person. When we talk about young people voting in particular, notorious for not turning out in any election or really getting engaged necessarily in politics overall, it takes a few years till they're fully engaged.
Yeah.
Do you think that you'll have to sell this idea of mobile voting for them to actually engage them to actually want to use it on their phones?
It's a really good question. So I think on one hand, the good news is they're already on their phones. And I've had conversations with people like Meta, for example, and said, hey, if this were legal, would you be willing to remind your customers hey, now if you clicked here, you could go to the New York City Board of Elections and you can download the app to participate or wherever you are. And they've said, yeah, sure. So I do think that if the platforms are engaged and iOS and everyone else is engaged, yes. And the other good thing is, in a weird way, because turnout is so abysmal, right? So city council primary turnout last year was 7.2% in the city. It was 2.9% for people under the age of 30. We don't have to go to 70% turnout to make a difference, right? If we just go from 7% to 25%, that's almost quadrupling it. So we don't even need huge numbers of people to participate to make a really big difference. And so, yeah, like anything, it will take time for people to get used to and get in the habit of doing. But I think about my daughter. She's 18. I dropped her off at college about a month ago, and she's excited for the opportunity to vote, and this is her first election. But at the same time, is she really going to do all of the stuff necessary to vote absentee by mail? Probably not. But since we started this panel, has she checked her phone 34 times? I guarantee she has. And if she could vote on her phone, I know she would do so.
And what type of assurances are involved in mobile voting that you can tell us about? I was at CNN when they tried the Iowa Caucuses app, and that completely failed.
Which we told them not to do.
Yes,
yes.
it's just not a very good idea then.
So, yeah, if it's
Tell
okay,
us
let me
about
walk you
that.
through kind of how it would work. So we'll just use New York since we're sitting here example. So you would download an app from the New York City Board of Elections, and the first thing it would say is, okay, is Kelly a registered voter in New York City? They confirm that you are. The next question is Kelly Kelly? Right? So the first thing is multi-factor authentication. So it's that same kind of code that you get from Amazon or Google, where they text a number to your cell phone and you have to enter that back on the website. And the second thing would be whatever security measure the Board of Elections chooses to use, that's up to each jurisdiction, but the app allows for things like biometric screening. So if you've ever been in an airport and you use Clear, or when we did pilots in 7 different states where deployed military voted, we use facial recognition scans. So through all of that, they say, okay, Kelly is definitely Kelly. Here's your ballot. So the ballot pops up on your phone. The idea is to make that as simple and easy as possible, but because it's electronic, we get rid of issues like stray pencil marks or hanging chads or undervoting or overvoting. So you pick your candidates, you pick whatever you want to vote for, and once you're like, okay, this is what I want, you hit submit and 2 things happen. The first thing is your ballot is immediately encrypted. And the second thing is you get a tracking number, just like if you were sending a packet or something like that. The ballot then goes to the Board of Elections, and the first thing they do is they take it offline. That's called air gapping, and that means it's no longer connected to the internet, because ultimately the biggest way that someone can hack something is through the internet. If something is offline, no one can hack this water bottle because it's a water bottle, right? Once it's removed offline, only then is your ballot decrypted. It's then printed out, so there's a paper copy of every single ballot. It's mixed in with all of the other ballots. It's tabulated. You're able to track the progress of your ballot all the way through the end of the process. And then because the code itself is open source, that means it's available on the internet, and anyone can look at it and say, were there any bugs? Were there any abnormalities? And they can go through it and check and make sure there were no errors. So it's a process that has a lot of redundancy, a lot of security, a lot of accountability, a lot of auditability. I believe that it is a vastly more secure way to vote than any way we vote now. And to be clear, we're not arguing to have mobile voting replace anything. I'm just saying, hey, keep in-person voting, mail-in voting, let's have every form of voting possible, and let's give people an additional option if that's what they want to use. Like my kids, they would use that. My parents, probably not. But that's okay. So that's how we're going about it. And look, the reason why I've been building this philanthropically out of my foundation is when code is open source, that means that by definition, like a private company doesn't make their code open source because then they can't make money on it because then ultimately anyone can just copy it. So my view was it was going to take someone doing this in a philanthropic way to say, hey, I don't care about the money, I just want this to happen. And so my hope is that we have built something really great, and we're going to submit it to the National Institute of Standards and Technology for their review, and then once they're done, we're going to make this free, and hopefully we can get people to use it.
I think that would be a really good idea. I think especially coming out of COVID, so many people use mail-in ballots. It was such an issue, especially for college students. You mentioned your daughter, that whole complication. I think just having another option, it might start slow, but it could potentially grow. I want to go back to the idea of young people voting. We're in an election year. The vice president is now running for president. There seems to be a lot of momentum at the Democratic National Convention. There was a lot of, I would say, social media influencers along with the media, traditional media like us. Why is it important right now to engage those young voters? So much could be decided. I was counting the weeks today. It's exactly 6 weeks till November 5th. Why is it important to engage young voters and make sure that they're coming out to the ballot box?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first and foremost, 40% of the eligible electorate is Gen Z and millennial, right? Folks who are using their phones all the time. So if any party, whether Democratic or Republican Party, wants to win, they have to get those voters to turn out in our election, most especially within our swing states. And a way to do that is through people who are utilizing social media, right? People who are influencing others to not only buy things, but eventually, in this election, to turn them out to vote. And I spoke a little bit earlier about how, the key to great politics is meeting people where they're at. That's not only in terms of communications, right? That's not only in terms of knocking on doors and sending mail or even reaching someone through social media. That's reaching them through the issues, right? There's so many young people who, my friends included, who say they don't care about politics, but then will spend an entire dinner complaining about their rent prices and healthcare and
Grocery store
prices,
Yep.
right? And they understand that there is some correlation there, but I don't believe that many of our representatives are reaching them in a way that helps them connect those two dots together. And I find that even in this election, we're seeing one party. I think the Democratic Party is speaking about issues that a lot of young people care about more, but they're also leaning on the fact that these influencers and creators and people who utilize social media are able to get those issues down or out to those voters. So, I think one, we have a huge electorate that will have, this will be their first election that they're voting in, and two, we're seeing that there are parties, both the Democratic and the Republican Party, are leaning on one of the strongest social media strategies that I've seen in any prior presidential election.
Completely. I think social media is the way forward if you want to continue to reach more and more voters. I wanted to ask you about that. How do you pick your topics? The Rent Guidelines Board meeting, to me, is something where people get passionate about their rent. It's like their child, and your child's education. You don't mess with a mom and where her child goes to school or a parent. How do you choose the issues, and then how do you make them something palatable, something that people get excited about? Because I scroll through my phone all the time, but I don't always watch the entire 60 seconds of whatever video it is.
Totally. I think my politics, and I think the best politics, maybe I'm a little biased, is populist politics, right? Issues that impact people's day-to-day lives, and in this case of living in New York City, that's rent, right? It's easy to talk about the problem of rent, so it should be easy to talk about the solutions of how to tackle the affordability crisis within New York. So many of my videos come down to increasing housing supply, to banning forced broker fees, to turning out folks to show up to the Rent Guidelines Board hearings, and these are very easy topics to speak about because they affect the day-to-day lives of New Yorkers of all ages, races, genders, and that's how I've been able to find these topics to be the ones that I don't only lean on in terms of the videos that I create, but in terms of the policies that I prioritize. There have been difficult topics that we've covered on my social media platform. For example, there's a charter revision that will be on the ballot this November that the mayor is proposing to take some powers away from the city council. And even with something that doesn't sound as sexy as a charter revision, we've been able to make a video that reaches, tens of thousands of people because, I'm able to break it down in a way that people will understand. And, when it comes to some of those more complex issues, I just speak to people online like I would speak to my friends or family.
I would just, fun fact about the Charter Revision Commission, their first meeting was actually held exactly in this room for anybody who's watching the politics at City Hall. But last question about social media. Do you
Yeah.
think it's important for all sitting members or politicians to harness social media? And if they're not, how do you think they should start? I'm somebody that's in the millennial generation. I'm not good at social media.
Yeah.
I basically am like an old person using it. You think it's important to start harnessing that going into the future of how we talk about politics?
Absolutely. So I think I said earlier that half of the job of an elected official, maybe even more than half, is writing bills, negotiating budgets, approving land use items and whatnot. But I believe that the other half of the job is getting that information out to the people. You can get 10,000 bills passed that will benefit the lives of New Yorkers or Americans. But if you're not getting that information out to them, then how do they know that that is something that's going to help them? So I do believe all elected officials from local to federal should be using social media to reach their constituents and even as prospective candidates reaching voters. And then I guess in terms of how they should do that, I do see a lot of people within New York City politics now, adapting to my style of reaching out to people through social media, and we're very flattered in my office. But I think the key to doing that is authenticity, right? I think when some of my colleagues, do it in an authentic way, you can see that it doesn't really come across that well.
Scripted,
And
I get you.
I think that some of them should really tap into whoever they are. If you're, a bit more, suited and booted, then definitely tap into that, and maybe there's someone out there that will enjoy that type of content.
Okay, I like that bit of advice for all those out there. Speaking of getting information out there and harnessing that power, talk to me how we're in a really important election year. How do you plan to take the momentum of this year to kind of get your mobile voting app across the country, using that momentum to get more people excited about it and possibly using it or adopting it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only good news about this election is that half the country will be frustrated with the outcome, and whichever way it goes.
Well, unfortunately for them, that's always how it goes, right?
Yeah.
There's always a losing team and a winning team in any race.
And the other thing is because the process of voting in this country is usually so cumbersome. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but at least half the time if I show up at the polling place, something's wrong, right? And I think you can take that sort of abysmal experience and say, okay, the same way that you move money, the same way that you conduct your health care, the same way that people conduct their love lives, all of these things. Now, wouldn't it be great if you could vote this way too? And I think by being able to take an election that will be A, highly visible, B, highly controversial and partisan, and C, likely screwed up because they all tend to be screwed up, that gives us a certain amount of momentum. But I think also, to a certain extent, just want to get back to one thing that she was saying before, which is, I think that one of the reasons why it's so important that politicians know how to use social media and that we're able to really bring technology into government is, from what I see from Gen Z, they think about issues differently. The reality is, I don't think they're even that partisan. I think there are facts of life to them. Like, for example, guns, right? My kids have never known life without active shooter drills at school. Right? So their view isn't like Second Amendment, yes or no. It's, I don't want to get shot at school, and it seems like that might be a possibility because we have to practice this, every few months. Or climate, they've never known life without a world of constant climate emergencies, right? So, I think that in a lot of ways, what a lot of politicians are getting wrong on both sides of the aisle is they're just using the traditional dichotomy of the Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, and I don't think that's how this generation thinks about issues. I think they're actually kind of pragmatic. And the question is, who's going to speak to them? I mean, there's a chapter in the book where we talk about a lot of sort of Gen Z people like Maxwell Frost, who's a congressman from Florida, who's 25 or whatever he is right now. And it's that this is a group that I think to a certain extent they're not automatically to be Democrat. They're going to respond to people who talk about the issues that they care about in a way that makes sense to them. That's why you're doing so well. Now, I do think that it's, if the Republican Party doesn't grow wise to that and they cede all these issues to Democrats, they're ceding an entire generation of voters to Democrats. But I also think that fundamentally, the way we're approaching politics is changing, and you need technology for people to really both understand that and express that.
That's interesting you mentioned that. I have a younger sister who's 10 years younger than me, somebody who works deeply in politics. We see politics differently. So it's very fascinating when I hear her talk about any type of issue, because that's exactly how she talks about it. I grew up in Florida where we had hurricane drills, but not active shooter drills, even though it's a red state and it's very much, we have that, or in Florida they have they have standard ground laws. So they're very pro-gun there. So it's very fascinating listening to them, how they think about issues. When I'm at work, we talk about one issue voters that are the ones that turn out naturally, especially in New York City and anywhere else. And I wanted to talk to you with this mobile voting app, specifically to New York City. We have ranked choice voting here, right? How would this app work in that type of situation? Because you would have to vote multiple rounds, right?
Right. So we've actually built the technology specifically to incorporate ranked choice voting into it. So Rob Ritchie, who is the founder of Fair Vote and is sort of the leading proponent in America for ranked choice voting, has an essay in the book. So the book has a section of guest essays from people who are supporting mobile voting. The most prominent person there is Martin Luther King III. In fact, I'm really excited. I'm doing an event with him at the Carter Presidential Library on Thursday night to talk about mobile voting. He's a big fan of it because he thinks that it's the best way to prevent voter suppression. David Hogg, who is the kid that sort of emerged from Parkland, wrote the foreword to the book. He likes it from a Gen Z access perspective. Rob Ritchie, who is the founder, the leading proponent of ranked choice voting, kind of makes the case to say, if you can both get the number of people who have access to online voting and then allow them to sort of stack rank their choices, the impact is exponentially powerful, right? Because ultimately, if the benefit of ranked choice voting is A, it moves candidates to the middle, and B, it promotes a certain level of civility because people don't, if a candidate is a jerk, you might like that candidate and they might be your first choice vote, but they're not really, like Donald Trump would never be anyone's second choice vote, right? Either he's number one or number zero for you. And so if you could combine the reach of mobile voting with sort of the powers of ranked choice voting to sort of change the way that behavior occurs within campaigns, that's incredibly powerful. So Final Five, ranked choice voting, open primaries, we're incorporating all of those potential reforms into what we're doing because in my view, if we can make voting both a lot easier and sort of a lot more accessible in every single way, that's when you can really create change.
And where would you say is a good starting point for your app? Like, where
So
do you see it?
Unfortunately, not
starting?
New York. I wish it were. This is the city that
Maybe not next year
I
because
care
the
about
mayor's
the
up
most.
for re-election. But
Well, the other problem is I think we're going to need Albany in New York, and Albany is just a place where reform goes to die typically. So we're looking at cities either that are kind of more historically friendly to reform. So Minneapolis is a really good one. Anchorage, Alaska is a really good one. We're looking at cities that have big military populations. So Colorado Springs is a really good one. Colorado in general is pretty good for us. And then there are cities where that are majority minority. So when you have voter bases who are sort of worried about voter suppression, right? So ultimately, the reason why they want people in Georgia or Texas to have to show up is to then find an excuse to turn them away. And if people are just pressing a button in their living room, you can't do that to them, right? And so I think majority-minority cities in Atlanta, Miami make a lot of sense. So, we're going to put bills in play in a bunch of places, and my hope is we'll pass a couple of them. And the one good thing I know about, my work in technology and as a venture capitalist, as a sort of my day job, is once the genie's out of the bottle with tech, it doesn't go back in. So once people somewhere are able to see like, hey, there's this much better way to do it, then all of a sudden it's like, well, why can't I do this, right? And then all of a sudden all of your followers, you're making a video saying, look at all these people in Minneapolis who are able to vote on their phone. Shouldn't we be able to do that here? And that's what starts to produce the movement. And look, every single movement in this country has required overcoming the status quo, right? The status quo did not want to give women the right to vote, and enough people demanded it, and it happened. The status quo did not want the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, but they happened. The status quo did not want same-sex marriage, but it happens. So we can pass fundamental reforms in this country, but it almost always happens over the objections of the people who are currently in power, and that's what we're going to have to do here too.
Do you think that something like your Movo voting app could increase our notoriously low voter turnout? In how many how many years would you say it could turn that around?
You know, I think in a couple, like it probably wouldn't be in the first election, but again, if we're at 7.2% city council primary turnout, as she said, people say, oh, I don't care about politics, and then they complain about all of these things that ultimately, oh, the subway stinks, and the park is dirty, and I have bad options where to send my kids to school and all this stuff. Well, you know why you have these bad options? Because no one participates in the system, and that does two things. One, it doesn't necessarily allow for the mainstream positions to take hold, but two, it lets government get away with really subpar performance, right? When no one's paying attention, you can be dysfunctional and inefficient and ineffective, and people are like, I guess that's how government works. But if a lot more people are voting and paying attention, we'll elect better people and we'll hold them to a higher standard, and that'll get us better government, better services. And I think to a certain extent, one problem we have in this country is that people have lost faith in government, and I can't blame them, right? I mean, this has really been a trend since really the Vietnam War, where whether it's government or the church or higher ed or the media or Wall Street or anything, people have lost faith in all of our institutions because they keep failing them. But that's because we have a government, at least, that is so polarized that they can't get anything done. If we get to a place where we can incentivize politicians to start working together again, then people can see, oh, we can do something about climate. We can do something about affordable housing. We can do something about healthcare. And that starts to restore faith, and that's what gets us both better people running for office and better people doing the job once they're in office.
Well, that leads to my next question to you, which is bringing back faith in democracy. You started with you want to get more people engaged in democracy, but I think the first step is letting them know that they can trust it. I think many people believe that everything's an institution, that you can't really break it, you can't understand it, and their one vote doesn't matter. I hear that so often. Well, I'm not going to vote because it just gets drowned out by everybody else. Do you think that your push for social media is part of changing that type of narrative and bringing more people to the ballot box?
Yeah. I think it's not only my push for social media to have a role in our democracy, but also, making voters know or electorates know or constituents know that their elected officials are accessible, right? I think social media is a way to show them that we're right here, and I think that stems from local government first, right? I always say that city government or local government is the vanguard of rebuilding trust between the people and their democracy. Your city council members are your most accessible elected officials here in the city. You could go into an office wherever you live, and you may see them. You may not be able to sit down with them immediately, but you may see them when you go into that office. And we've seen how people have changed their minds about democracy through the work that we do in this office, but also how we show that work through social media. When someone, whose door I knocked on, who voted for me to get elected not once but twice, calls my office about wanting a trash can on their corner or their tree trimmed, and we get that done and even post about it, it shows them that their vote actually helped them with the issue that they deal with on a day-to-day level. So I don't only see social media as a tool or as a medium to rebuild that faith of those who are engaged or want to be more engaged or who are only starting to be engaged, but I also see good governance, especially at the local level, to be a tool to regain that trust between the people and their democracy.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, this is sort of a new concept a little bit, but you look at all of these scandals that you're covering constantly.
What scandals?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
And what are most of them about? They're about contracts, right? They're about procurement and they're about kickbacks. And so we're talking on social media, we're talking mobile voting. I've been thinking lately about what if we were to use AI for procurement, right? So the procurement process, by definition, when human beings are doing it, at best it's going to be political, and at worst it's going to be corrupt, and often it's both. And there may be tools to say, hey, we can remove some of that temptation and some of that human fragility from the process and have a more honest government. So again, after all the scandals of the Adams administration, it's not surprising that people are cynical, and it's not surprising that people have lost faith, because if they feel like, well, every time that, everything that's getting done is crooked and someone's benefiting from it on the side and everyone's looking for their crumbs and everything else, then we just have more and more cynicism. And so I think there's, a lot of different technologies, from TikTok to mobile voting to AI that we could use to deliver a more representative, better government for the people and a better democracy.
Well, I was going to just push back on using technology. It always starts with a couple of bumps. So, what would you say to critics to say we start using it? There could be a flaw in the system. You know, basically, it's like being a lab rat. You have to start somewhere so
Yeah.
you can get the kinks out.
Well, I mean, I think that's true for anything, right? So there are people who will say, you know, mobile voting, we don't know. Maybe something could go wrong. And my argument would be, one, the current forms of voting are pretty risky. So you guys are too young to probably really even remember this too well. But in 2000, George W. Bush,
Hanging
because of hanging chads, you're
Yes,
from Florida.
I'm from Florida, yes.
Right.
I was 2. So
Right.
I don't
But think about the implications of this, right? So by Bush winning and not Gore, let's assume that 9/11 still happens. Fine. So the response to Afghanistan, Al Qaeda, probably the same thing. But Al Gore's father didn't sort of have to have his legacy avenged by his son sort of invading Iraq. And Al Gore's vice president didn't own a big chunk of Halliburton. And as a result, we got a war that killed 1 million people. Now, not that many were Americans, still too many, but a couple thousand, but close to 1 million Iraqis, and $1.7 trillion of U.S. money, taxpayer money, was wasted. That could have gone to feeding people or anything, all because of paper ballots and hanging chad. So, the question is, could mobile voting in some way not be perfect? Absolutely. Are the current forms of voting not perfect? Absolutely. I think mail-in voting is great, and yet mail trucks get lost all the time. And it's not necessarily a conspiracy, just things happen in the world. The other thing you have to weigh is, what's the cost of doing nothing, right? So the cost of doing nothing right now from a national level is, I literally think the country is on fire. And you could argue that in 25 years, if we are this dysfunctional and this polarized, people might conclude we shouldn't even be one country. And that might not even be a crazy conclusion. And yet, if we were truly divided, that'd be one thing. But I don't remember if I said this or not, 70% of us would say that, take guns. We should neither confiscate everyone's guns, nor should it be easy to walk into a store and walk out with an assault rifle. Immigration. We should neither deport everyone here illegally, nor should we have open borders. Even abortion, right? The third rail of American politics. 2/3 of people agree there should be a right to abortion. You can debate how many weeks, but they don't really debate the fundamental thing. So it's not that we're that divided. It's that we don't vote, and the people who do vote are really divided. And so fundamentally, there's a way to bring this all back because we actually do agree. But the cost of doing nothing, whether it's trying to fix procurement or trying to engage people in their democracy through social media or trying to make it easier to vote, is a broken system that gets perpetuated and it just makes people's lives worse. And we don't have to live like that.
I mean, definitely don't have to live that way. I think AI is fascinating. I never thought about it with city contracts and procurement, but I know that many people use AI right now for small things. So it'd be fascinating to see it work in local government. But I just wanted to ask you about the point he brought up where we're so polarized. Your videos don't necessarily speak to that. Do you think that social media, the videos you make, have an opportunity to kind of fill in that gap where you're not either going one way or the other necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, I think it totally builds off of Bradley's point, right? I think, again, an issue like rent is not a polarizing issue for New Yorkers, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, right? I think populist politics, as I said before, is the best politics, right? In many ways, it's non-political or nonpartisan at all, right? It just takes the political will and political courage as well as political education to voters on how they can change, some of the circumstances that we currently deal with right now. So I totally agree with that point in terms of how a lot of these issues, are not partisan, they're popular. And I think if we gave people more tools on how to put people in place to enact solutions to those nonpartisan problems, I think our city, state, and country could be in a better place.
Okay, awesome. I'm not sure if we're at time or do we have more time to ask questions?
Yeah,
To,
go for
to
it.
talk to each other? Or,
Yeah.
or do we go into the Q&A?
Yeah, I think there's a
we can
Yeah,
Q&A
okay,
mic
great.
that
If
just came
anyone's
out.
got any
Yes,
questions.
okay, perfect timing. For anybody who wants to ask questions from the audience, I believe.
I think we have a hand right back there.
Hey, how are you? My name is Dean. Thank you so much for coming to my alma mater and speaking to us. My question is, when you look at political polarization, right, you don't really see a divide these days in terms of socioeconomic status or race as much. We truly see a divide in America based off of certain heuristics such as college education. If you look at the prime distinction between people who are voting for Trump, what's even more distinct than their race or their socioeconomic background is the fact if they hold a 4-year bachelor's degree, specifically in the liberal arts or not. I do believe in mobile voting, but it seems like with ranked choice voting and some of these very progressive ideas, parts of the countries that feel disenfranchised, that have been hurt by big government regulations, are going to have a huge push towards this. What are ways we can build capacity building infrastructure to unite the country and make everyone understand that some of these things are in everyone's best interest and not have it seem like this, liberal big city economic push that the Midwest that, has a town that was devastated by the opioid crisis is now going to have another, liberal Democrat city push.
Totally. A few things first thing is tonal, right? So I used to be the deputy governor of Illinois, and Illinois is sort of a great archetype of the country as a whole. Chicago is this big city. You've got suburbs, some are liberal, some are conservative, and then you have a lot of rural areas throughout the rest of the state. And part of it, from what I saw, is like one really bad habit that I think kind of people on the coast have is, yes, you might be highly educated. Yes, you might genuinely just want to see the world be a bit better. But, when you lecture people and you tell them, here's what you have to think, and if you don't think the way I think, you're racist or you're bad or you're evil, all that does is alienate people. That's what elects people like Donald Trump. So the first thing is tonal. But the second thing is, it gets back to the fact that when you have a broken democracy, you end up with an ineffective government, right? So when we talk about higher ed, we have, a community college system with graduation rates of 5 to 10%, right? That's because they're not the government that is running these. Now, Hunter is a great school, and CUNY's a lot better than that, but that is not what we see around the country, right? We have a K through 12 system that is wildly broken, and I would argue in some ways because Democrats constantly cave to teachers' unions and tell them and do what they want them to do and put the interest of adults in the system ahead of the interest of kids in the system, right? I think both parties are guilty of caving to special interests who are powerful in their own party primaries. And so part of it is cultural and tonal, but part of it also is, if we have a government that is not so captive to special interests and is more competent, they can start getting stuff done again. And then all of a sudden the divides that you're talking about aren't as stark, because a lot of people in this country who are voting for Donald Trump, I don't agree with them, but at the same time, I recognize that they are frustrated, right? They feel like they don't have opportunity. They feel like they are not being heard, and they feel like this guy gets them. And even if, we think he's crazy, they don't feel that way. And in some ways, the more that we tell them they're crazy, the more that resolute they become in it. And so I think, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg here, but, we got to start is with a better government. That's only going to happen if government becomes more representative of the people.
I am a former council member and a former member of Congress.
Yeah, not just
Hello.
that.
I did not see you in the
I
audience.
saw
Here
Carolyn was there.
specifically-
Yeah, you're really underselling yourself.
How are you? How's it been?
Well, I came here specifically to hear you tonight and to thank Chi Ose for a phenomenal win. As a former council member, I know how hard it is to take on the rental control board, and I was there 10 years. We always lost. Maybe we could shave 1 point off, maybe 2 if we were lucky. But that you jumped from 18 to 1.5%, it's like, wow. And it's just almost unbelievable that you were able to do it with really not spending a lot of money, just organizing with social media. I think it's great. And Bradley, I very much appreciated your whole case for Uber. I think it's an asset.
You were one of the people, so I have to give Carolyn credit here. At a time where politicians were still sort of doing the bidding of Taxi because Taxi gave out campaign contributions, some people saw kind of, hey, you know what? My constituents actually like this thing, right? They like not having to stick up their hand in the rain. And one of the first politicians in the entire country to see it and to have the courage to say it is that woman right there. And when you think about things like Uber and other technologies being available to consumers today, she's a big reason why.
Well, I always took on the special interests, and that's probably why I'm not in office anymore, because they go after you. But I thought Uber is more transportation. That's good for New York. We've got 8 million people that need to get around. I love taxis too, but why not have both? I think it's great. So I came really to thank you for what you did really for the fabric of our city, but also to ask you for your advice. And I have an issue that is polling at 88% with Democrats. When have you seen that ever in your life? And roughly 60 to 65%. It's at 60% for men and 65% Republican. And it's the Equal Rights Amendment. It's been around 101 years. It merely says that women should not be discriminated against. I'm talking about the federal one that is limited to women. And we can't seem to move it. So both of you have taken on. Oh boy. I'm sorry. Some people think I'm still in Congress. They keep calling me all the time. Anyway, what would be your advice to the women's movement, which is not well funded, but has tremendous numbers behind it, particularly with the Dobbs decision, to move the Equal Rights Amendment? And that is the project that I'm working on here at Hunter College. And you're two of, what can I say, nothing is better than success. And both of you have been very successful in using social media to achieve taking on powerful interest. And the polling is unbelievable. In the 70s, when it passed originally, it was at 60%. It's now at 80%, 88%. I've never seen anything poll as good as the Equal Rights Amendment, yet we can't seem to move it. We're in the process of trying to get a motion to discharge to move it to the floor without the consent of the Republican leadership. But what is your advice on how would you move it? You know, I know if I went to you, I'd probably have to pay you a big, huge sum to get your advice.
No,
so I
just me.
thought
He's
I'd take
free.
advantage of Hunter's Public Policy Institute, which is so generous to all of us with their knowledge. So thank you for what you've accomplished, and I'd love to hear your advice.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for that question. I think it's a combination of both of the things that we're talking about here today, right? Maybe I'm guessing that the lack of movement on this act is the lack of political will that may exist in Congress right now. Maybe there is a sentiment from many of your former colleagues who do not feel as if they need to move on this highly popular bill. And I think that the solution for that is, engaging people who care about that issue, right? If there is 88%, of Democrats who are in support of this, they need to feel like their representatives are not listening to them, and that is, reaching them through the ways that we have been talking about here tonight. Whether it's through social media, which I think is a great tool to energize a lot of young people to blow up the phones of their congressional representatives and tell them to pass this bill. And in some ways that may not work, but in combination with giving them. No, you are so okay. In combination with giving them more access to vote and apply that pressure on their representatives, may be the perfect combination to get something like that past the finish line.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree completely. And the only thing I would add onto it also is I think you can accomplish more and more today in politics without money, right? Which is really good. So, ultimately, even in this presidential election, I'm not sure that all the money, and that they're spending.
There's so
is,
much.
I mean, we're talking about what, 100 or so thousand undecided voters in 7 states, and then maybe a couple 100,000 people who are maybe, you'd want to mobilize who are not definitely voters. They're going to end up, by the time they're done showing this, spending tens of thousands of dollars for each one of those people with incredibly declining returns. But the good news is you don't necessarily need that. So like with Uber, we didn't really spend any money, right? We just built the tool into our app. That was really cheap, and we let people know. And every time they open the app, and when we had to, we created de Blasio mode, where we let people know that if de Blasio had his way, there'd be a 25-minute wait time, and their price would double. And amazingly, that prompted tens and tens of thousands of New Yorkers to tell their city council members, "Hey, I want this thing," and it worked. And so I think the good news is there are ways, Carolyn, and happy to talk about this offline as well, to use social media and technology to really make this an issue front and center, because at the end of the day, elected officials do what they think they need to do, in my experience, to stay in office. And when they're hearing about something constantly, then they prioritize it. But when they just know something is the right thing to do, like the ERA, but they don't really feel any political pressure to do so. They put it off and they don't spend capital on it. And so I think part of the answer is there are tools that now exist that are low cost that could be really effective. And so I think some of it is, making sure that you guys have access to those tools.
And let's connect to see how we could, work together on making some noise around that,
Sure. There's a bunch of people.
I never get to call on people.
Yeah.
Hi. So I like the point you guys made about Gen Z being pragmatic and voting differently than other generations. I definitely agree. I think as a member of Gen Z, maybe one of the few ones here. And I mean, I'm not in your district. I'm next door, District 37. But I think part of the issue is information. My generation, unlike previous generations, is less likely to just vote Democrat down the ticket. They want to know more about those candidates. And I think an issue I'm sure you faced in your first election was information, how to get the people in your district, even the ones not on social media, to know what you stood for and what you believe in. And then I'm curious if you think accessibility will create a path also for information, or whether that's something that needs to come with it, or whether you think accessibility solves
I
the
think
whole
it
problem.
creates the opportunity for it. So one of the things that we're sort of building into the system is the ability for jurisdictional election officials to say, okay, here's the ballot, but here is also nonpartisan information about the candidate. So like there was always, this League of Women Voters pamphlet that would get mailed around to everyone. That's sort of an anachronism in today's world, but why couldn't we have an interactive digital version of that with really good infographics that people can learn, okay, here's the issues I care about and here's where the candidates stand, and it has to be done in a nonpartisan way. Otherwise, it's just campaign advertising. But yeah, I mean, my hope ultimately is that the platform that we're building is used to register to people to vote, to let them know where candidates stand on the issues, and then to enable them to vote. And so I think, to me, it all comes together.
And your question was, how did I get information about my race and what I was running on? Yeah. Yeah, well,
You do have New York One.
One.
About to say that. You do have New York One.
we were doing everything to reach voters. Luckily, I had a huge volunteer team of especially young people who were getting engaged in a local campaign for the first time. And we weren't just using social media. Our social media game was great in terms of, my following, what we were posting, a lot of the press that we got. But we also did not neglect the fact that, traditional campaign strategies is sometimes how we win these local races. We knocked on thousands of doors. We made thousands of calls multiple times to reach voters. So I believe that the reason I won in that tough race was not only because we relied on social media, which was something that I was more used to and probably better at than many of my competitors at the time, but we also campaigned traditionally in a robust way. And I think that combination of everything allowed me to reach voters, to let them know about my issues, and also to get them to turn out and vote for me. And we turned out a record amount of young people in a local city council race. So I want to credit that to that as well. Sure. It's still social media. Like you don't need to be a young person to a young elected official to reach voters through social media, right? I see Ed Markey does it very well. I think he has a wonderful personality and something that translates well through social platforms that makes young people excited about it. Tim Walz is going viral on TikTok, right, because of his responses on CNN. I think as I said before, that authenticity of whoever the candidate is something that can be tapped into whether it's through the candidate or the director of communications. And I think, you know, my generation, our generation responds very well to that type of authenticity that is used through various different platforms.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders is like 100, and you know he is authentic. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I believe he believes it, and I think that's. I mean, ultimately, what I really think voters and want to see is like, do you believe this, or are you saying it because either your pollster told you to say it, or some special interest told you to say it, or whatever it is? And I think that, you know, in the world of social media, there will be a real emphasis on authenticity, which is great because then we can have politicians actually doing the things that they believe in as opposed to what they're told to do.
I was just going to say, as somebody who's not very good on social media, but I have to because of work, I try to not be ambitious. So something small, like I mentioned, there's even videos that I don't even watch for like 30 seconds. So you can start with something as simple as maybe your response to something or something that you found interesting. But I think so many people, especially older generation people, think they have to be super ambitious about what they post. And it honestly, people are scrolling through. And so if you're just like, maybe these 10 seconds I'll start with, or 15 seconds, one straight idea, I think that's like the best way to do it. Not that I run campaigns. I'm not giving anybody advice, but I'm saying from personal experience.
Maybe one more.
Yeah, all to the well and good. Most of the discussion, though, if not all of it, is outside. How can I put this? Is outside in centered, but the crisis of participation, voting, health of democracy, unity, national unity, and all of that is an inside-out problem as well. Civics education, suffering, and all of that kind of thing. How do you reach that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I read a column for the Daily News, and a couple of months ago, my column was specifically saying we should mandate national service. And the reason I believe that it's not the military per se. Our military doesn't need that many people. But fundamentally, you know, we have a society. So I don't know if you've ever read the World Happiness Report, but it's a really well-researched report. And the one that came out last year, I read it, and the thing that was so shocking to me was that for people under the age of 30, the United States came in 68th for happiness. So we are the richest, most abundant society in the history of the world, and yet our young people are fundamentally unhappy. Our country came in 23rd overall. And why is that? And I think it's because we have this misplaced notion that you win in life by getting more stuff and more status and, you know, more likes and more clicks and everything else. And fundamentally, based on all of the sort of research I've seen, happiness, you know, this gets beyond even politics or democracy. Human happiness really comes down to two things. Relationships. Are there people in your life who you really care about and really care about you, and you can count on them, they can count on you? And fulfillment. Are you doing things that give you purpose and meaning? And that thing can vary wildly from person to person, but it's got to be something. And when it's just purely about the accumulation of status and wealth and, you know, retweets and whatever else, those are all empty calories. And so fundamentally, to me, the reason why I'd like to have national service is not even really because of the value we would get from a lot more people cleaning parks or volunteering at senior centers or tutoring or whatever it is. It's teaching them that, yes, if you give back to others and if you are willing to live with an abundance mentality instead of this sort of Trumpian zero-sum mentality, you will be a lot happier. Your life will be a lot richer. And I think that that's the reason why people are so sort of disengaged from sort of civic institutions is because it's kind of every man for himself right now. And I think we've just built a mentality in this country that is just fundamentally not designed to actually make people feel good about themselves and good about their lives. And so, you know, to me, things like service and civic education, yes, to promote more faith, hopefully, in government and better government itself, but more just to give people, you know, the underlying sense of, you know, here's what it takes to be a complete human being. And if you want to be happy, it's not what kind of car you drive or, you know, how many followers you have. It's whether you feel good about yourself. And so to me, fundamentally, your question is, it's not just the crux of the political problem, it's sort of the crux of humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think K through 12 civics education is so important. I cannot tell you how many times it's frustrating sometimes being an elected official and hearing, from constituents about, a problem with our Supreme Court, right? And I think, even in some of our elections, I hear from constituents who are like, I'm not, supporting Joe Biden because he actually didn't follow through on, or Joe Biden, sorry, Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris on, what this administration has done around, student loan debt, when that's obviously something that, fell onto our conservative Supreme Court. So, I think civics education is extremely lacking within our educational system, not only within public schools, but in independent schools as well. I hope it's not intentional, but I truly believe that if it existed, throughout all levels of all years of schooling for Americans, there would be more of an understanding of the power of their vote, thus resulting in higher turnout, no matter which party.
Sorry, I was just going to add, I grew up with parents that are immigrants, and so they're very into politics, very into news. And my dad, at a very young age, instituted, you have to read the newspaper every day, and you got to bring me your story, like a book report, basically, but tell him about some story, and he's going to ask us questions. And I think it might be difficult to, right now, because the country's so polarized, to do something like civics through K through 12. But I think something like that, diversifying where you get your news from. Of course, I want you to watch a New York one, but you should watch. It is. You should watch other places, just listen to different voices, diversity. I think a lot of misinformation is out there, and people can be in silos and listen to the same information all the time. I think it's important to diversify where you're getting your news, how you're getting your news. If you traditionally are a digital person, maybe watch TV. If you watch TV, go on social media. I think that helps to break that noise barrier of you're only hearing the same information all the time. And I think that's what creates apathetic voters sometimes, and it creates this idea that it's us versus them, and I think that can kind of help with that situation.
Let's thank our panel. Thank you, Councilmember Chiosei, Bradley Tusk, Kelly Mina. Thank you very much. Please join us upstairs for some pizza.